I wanted to start by just acknowledging the difficult roller coaster that the last few weeks have been for nonprofits. We know that last fall brought some difficult news about funding that may not be replaced in the pipeline, and additional just awareness of the end of pandemic specific funding, as well as a looming state budget deficit. So all of that creates a really difficult resource constrained environment for nonprofits across the state. Add on top of that, significant policy changes and funding cuts on the federal level that we're beginning to see, but still have a lot of questions about. It's a really difficult time to be working at or leading a nonprofit. And so we want to just start by saying we see you, we know that this is a really hard time, and there are just lots of questions about how you're going to move your organization forward and to serve the people that you care about. So at the Alliance, we are trying to track information about the impact of executive orders and funding cuts. And so we have a survey portal that you can send information to us confidentially or to share with the congressional delegation. So I want to just make that available. The more we know about the situations that you're facing from different federal agencies and federal funding streams, the better we are able to advocate on your behalf. We're also part of the National Council of Nonprofits, which has filed a lawsuit that stopped the whole of government funding freeze. But they need to know if there are departments that are not complying with the restraining order. So as much as information as you can share with us, that would be really helpful. So we know, to start with, this is a really difficult context and environment to be doing work. So the Alliance has been partnering with Skills for Rhode Island's Future since we started, but we have been looking through what is especially necessary for nonprofits in this time of constrained resources, and are putting together a series of conversations with state agencies so that you can hear directly from those leaders about what their FY26 budget looks like, about what their priorities are. They are still going to have a lot of uncertainty because of things happening in Washington. So there are going to be some questions that they can't answer, but it's helpful just to know, kind of level set the playing field so we all have the same information to work with. And so we're really grateful to Matt for being the first of the conversations that we are going to be having with a number of state agencies. We are also planning different programming in partnership with Skills to support different pathways that you may choose to move forward, whether that's increasing your fundraising or doing grant writing. We'll be having training on both of those. We're going to be having training about strategic planning and scenario planning and strategic partnerships, and all different pathways that you can use to move forward and to protect the work and the people that you serve. So all of that is in place, but we wanted to start with these conversations so that you can hear directly from the agency leaders. So I'm going to pass the microphone over to Nina and to Matt, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you, Nancy, so much. And it's really exciting to be here with all of you. For those of you on the call who I may not have had the chance to meet, my name is Nina Panday, and I serve as the Executive Director at Skills for Rhode Island's Future. And as Nancy mentioned, our first state director that we have on our call is Matt Weldon, who I'm sure is known to all of you. He serves as our state director at the Labor Department. And I have to say, Matt, I just want to thank you for taking your time to be with us here today. I know that you are a trusted voice and resource for me. And so I find it really fitting that you are the state leader who is kicking off this series. And I'm sure many on the call feel the same way, that you have always been available and accessible to help us navigate not just workforce development, but so many other facets of our local economy. So I just want to say thank you for being here and being open to having a conversation. What I'd like to do is jump right into a series of questions, Matt, that we would love to hear from you on. But just to remind all of the participants who are on the call, we would love for you to put your name and agency that you represent in the chat. And then also we will have time for Q&A. We'll leave about 15 minutes towards the end because we want to make sure that your questions are being answered. We have a team of folks monitoring the chat. They will synthesize questions, and we will hopefully be able to get to as many questions as possible. And if for some reason we do run out of time, we will cull all those questions together and hopefully be able to get back to you some additional answers from Matt or others in the state who might be more helpful. So Matt, welcome. Thank you for being here with us on a Friday, no less. I would love to jump into the hard question, right? The very first one that's on top of everybody's mind, skills for Rhode Island's future included. At the end of last year, many nonprofits, many organizations received a rather distressing letter from DLT on Real Jobs Rhode Island, right? And having to make some difficult decisions to essentially pause or not fund Real Jobs. We would love to hear from you on some of the reasons behind that, what precipitated or what led up to that letter, and whether or not there's any updates you can provide to those of us who have become reliant on some of those dollars. So Matt, over to you.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, we decided to send that letter out. Well, I decided to send that letter out around Halloween. It was, I think, the end of October. The reason at that time was because it had become very clear to us that despite our best efforts on the federal side, we weren't going to have enough resources to continue the program. I don't want to say at levels that it had historically been at, but at even a reduced level that would still get a lot of work done. We had fought for a long time to try to secure federal grants, and it's important to know that before the last administration, we pretty much got every grant that we ever applied for. If not every one, we were batting like 800 or 900. So that's pretty good. All of a sudden, the administration turned over and we started to strike out. And that got frustrating because this all leads to what happened. We would typically get these different grants, whether they be through the WIOA funding that's available through the federal government or some other, in those times, USDOL funding source. We would take that money and then add it into the workforce development, but largely real jobs, real pathways, real skills for youth context, and be able to put that money out. Everybody doesn't need to know how everything's worked in the kitchen. I always worked in restaurants. I was never a fan of open kitchens because it's our job to do that work and then to make sure that we get those resources out. And to all credit to Scott Jensen and the last administration, they built a fantastic program and they kept feeding it. And it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And when the funding sources that we had relied on at DLT started to go away, we saw that there were going to be challenges. Not only did we not get federal funding that we had applied for, and I'm not talking about a couple $1 million, I'm talking about Good Jobs Round 1, which was based on the Real Jobs program. We know it's based on Real Jobs because they use Real Jobs Rhode Island materials in their solicitation. We didn't get that. That was $25 million to support the program. There was a couple of other big initiatives, whether it be through Rhode Island Commerce that we partnered on with different Build Back Better programming that they had, or programming that we worked with the Office of Post-Secondary Education on. We missed out on tens of millions of dollars for workforce. And so that became a big challenge. Fast forward through the pandemic, and pandemic era resources filled up the coffers like you wouldn't believe. Something like $65 to $75 million was put out through Real Jobs and sister programs in over the course of 4 years or so. Had the pandemic not happened, we would have had this program reevaluation, if you will, 4 years ago. It would have been inevitable. There just wasn't enough money. And so now here we are, the pandemic funding goes away. And yes, we're still, we've obligated all of it. We're still spending down on some of it, but that makes it look as though we have more money than we do. Many of you know how our program works, not everyone that's on the call, but we obligate money and then you work against those obligations. And that really ties up the resource. And so we knew when we got the proposals for beginning in 2024, by the way, that we were challenged. And back then, if you're a Real Jobs partner, my team reached out to you to say, hey, we have a problem. We would like you to revisit your proposal and consider one of a couple of options. Option one would be somewhere around 60% of your ask for the year. Option two would be we could fund you maybe for 6 months, but with no promise that we'll have money after that. And that would mean probably around 50% of your ask. That happened in 2024. And that happened because we had received about $49 million worth of proposals, and we had about a $16 million budget. There's a $33 million gap there. Fast forward now, after that first, we'll call it a slowdown a little bit of Real Jobs, here comes 2025. Proposals come in at about $38 to $39 million. Total budget's about $10 to $11 million. We didn't know the budget when the request for work came in. That's why it kind of happened the way it did. I'll take credit for one thing and one thing only. I wanted to send you the news as soon as I could to let everybody know this is what we're facing and we have some significant challenges. In the past, we wouldn't have done that. We would have hoped that things got better and delayed and dragged our feet and then eventually funded some of you or many of you at different levels, but there would have been much more uncertainty. I'll own the panic that was caused, but I thought it was for me, it was better to let you know we're facing a real situation here. And then we can try to work through it. And everyone who asked me for time to talk about it got time. And almost everyone, if not everyone, had, took some serious cuts in their budget, but were able to get something out of us for this 6-month period that we're in right now. So not pretty, not fun. No one here enjoyed this experience. The one thing I think I want to make very clear, there was no decision to be made. I'm not the best budgeter in the world, but there are professionals here that do that. And they were calling my attention to it for a while, and we were watching it, and our fingers were crossed that we were going to get different grants, and that would help us, because every time we get a grant that's dedicated to one line of work, it frees up money for other things, and they just kept getting denied, and that's really where we ran into it. But there was no decision. We didn't choose not to fund Real Jobs. We didn't choose to walk away from a program that's, I think, best in the country. Because of all the work that you all did. There was no choice to be had. So that's kind of where we're at right now. The good thing is, on the state side, as much as we can, we're supporting the program. And the governor's budget supports it more than previous budgets have supported it. But there's no way we could ever make up that $30 million gap. It's just not possible, especially in this budget time. I've been working on this Road to Prosperity work, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But you can imagine how popular I am in the cabinet when most of my colleagues saw cuts in their budgets and our budget actually grew. I'm glad it did, because it's going to help us put that money out. It doesn't sit at DLT at all. And that'll be a good thing for some of this work that we're trying to do. Not nearly enough, but definitely a step in the right direction.
So Matt, we'll come back to the fiscal 26 budget priorities for the state and the Road to Prosperity work, but I'd love to maybe go back to the federal funding dependency, right? And you talked about this on why Real Jobs had to get paused or significant cuts. And as the Alliance and Skills has been supporting nonprofits, I think many of us don't realize the interdependency between the two, right? And so thank you for explaining that and how your budget is contingent upon what federal grants you can get. There's no shocker that we're all watching what's unfolding on the federal side right now. There's no crystal ball in terms of what's going to come out for additional funding as the federal administration figures out new funding priorities, how they'll fund, if they'll fund, what they'll fund. What are some things that nonprofits can be looking for? Like, what are you looking at when you're seeing the change at the federal level? Is there any signals? Are there any bat signals we should be listening for? Are there keywords or buzzwords that you're looking at, or is it all unfolding for you like it is for us, and we're just kind of all sitting and waiting?
I don't have a special, advance notice of any of the terrible ideas that are coming out of Washington. Um, we are just like everyone else trying to understand it. And I have a fantastic team. I'm able to do the job I do because they're so strong and so smart. And they're coming to me, and we've triaged this a little bit. So we have a process in place, but we're reading everything and trying to talk to colleagues throughout the country. I'm going to Washington next week for a couple of days to talk to my peers from most states that are attending, to really get a sense of how is our work going to be impacted. The work that we're able to do to put money out into the community is greatly controlled by the federal government. Even when we don't talk about funding, and that part makes me nervous. If they come back and maybe they catch their breath and start to issue some kind of draconian terms and conditions that have to be met in order for us to accept awards. My agency is mostly federally funded. So we even take it out of the workforce context and put it into unemployment insurance. All of those people are paid by funds that come from the federal government. And if they start to make conditions of award that we have to do some awful social policy change in Rhode Island, we're going to be in a really difficult spot.
Right.
Because 80 people that work for unemployment can't be paid by the state. They just don't have the money.
Right.
So that makes me anxious. So we don't have any advance notice. We get a sense of what's happening in Washington, and we try to make sure that our programs are lined up and protected as best as possible. And on the state side, we try to shore up the resources. The problem is, $3, $4, $5, $6 million at a time is great. It's huge in our budget situation, but it's a drop in the bucket compared to what we were getting. Our budget was in real jobs was 2/3 federal.
Right.
So that is a big challenge. I'm a generally pretty even-keeled person, unless I'm like snapping at Nora for giving me a hard time in my office. I try on the team, I try to be the one that stays level-headed. It's hard to be level-headed right now.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine what you're all dealing with. We have 400 people that work here at DLT, and my priority is to make sure that they can do their job and feel supported. And right now, that's a challenge.
Yeah, it is. Please don't take it all out on Nora. She's fabulous. We all need Nora to stay.
Thank you,
But I
Nina.
think you're welcome, Nora. But I think that that figure of 2/3 of real jobs was federally funded, right? Right there should be a sounding alarm bell for all of us who depend on some of those dollars. And the reality is the need hasn't changed, right? And you and I have talked about that. The need of the workers in Rhode Island hasn't changed. And so I want the nonprofits that are here to understand, if the federal government doesn't fund the state at the levels that it had, not only did we see the budget cuts in the fall, but there may not be funding in the future at all, right? I do want to stay, Matt, on the federal side, and this is another tricky conversation. And you mentioned adopting social policies that may go against our own moral code. How is the state, and I'm going to say more specifically DLT, and I'm going to ask this kind of selfishly, but not just for myself, but for many on the call, we're hearing the impacts of the federal executive order on DEI, and really forcing people to strip language that are the very heartbeat of their organizations, right? And I know, Matt, this is something that you have championed throughout your career. Equity is, I think, the first word that I hear out of your mouth every time that we sit down and talk, whether it is equity from a zip code perspective, or from an academic perspective, or from a gender perspective, or a disability perspective. How are you, as one of the state's biggest champions around diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, grappling with this? Because I know I, as a nonprofit leader, am really struggling, and I've talked to some of my colleagues, some of whom are on the call with us today, of saying, how do we stay true to our mission? How do we stay true to our work and to our calling, and helping those that need us the most, without staying out of the hairs of where the federal government is going? What is DLT doing? What are you doing? How are you talking about this internally and at the state level with the governor's office?
So, right now, we're playing the hand that we've been dealt. And then what I mean by that is I only have the information they've sent us. So, USDOL has sent us some very high level guidance that doesn't have a lot of specifics in it. I'm playing that out by the letter, meaning I'm continuing with our work. We're going forward because I haven't been told I can't do that. I expect that's going to change. And at some point, they're going to be clearer about what we are not to do with federal resources, or even worse, what we're not to do with our own resources if we accept federal resources for something else. And that's the part, those conditions of award are what make me super concerned. It's got a lot of downstream implications. So even if I fund an organization, let's call that organization Skills, to do something through DLT or GWB, and you're doing that kind of work with other resources, that could be a challenge. And we know we need to keep the work going. We also have to be careful about not intentionally trying to cause a lot of, panic and attention to ourselves, so the federal government finds a place in Rhode Island that they should drill in and make us an example. We want to help Rhode Islanders. I've talked to the governor's office. I saw on this session is my colleague Arthur Robinson, who heads up our Office of Community Engagement. And what I've said to the governor's office and the governor's senior leadership team is, we do community engagement at DLT. I don't think that's necessarily the same thing as what he's calling DEI. And they said, great, keep going. Now, do I think it's similar to what they're thinking about? Possibly. I want to make sure that we can make everybody in Rhode Island has a fair shot. And I know that means that some people need to be given different resources to be able to play at a level playing field. And that's equity work. If we have to figure out a way to keep doing it by changing it around a little, I'm okay with it. I'm not willing to walk away from it. And we had a little brief discussion about that this morning over something I won't talk about now, but at some point I'm going to have to stand up and say enough is enough. I don't know how we do that, and I got to be careful, because if I do that and it sacrifices the work that you're trying to do, then that's a problem. So I have a very difficult line to walk here, where I can try to protect us and do the right thing, but also maintain a relationship with the federal government so I can keep the money that we do have coming in. Because in addition to like my unemployment money, we run the one-stop career centers. That's all federally funded. We put money out for people to go to what they call the eligible training provider list, which is individual training accounts where people can go get trained and spend up to, I think, like $7,500 or even more maybe now on a particular skills training. All that's federally funded. There's a lot of things that we do that could be implicated by rash decisions. So we're analyzing everything. I'm getting the best information I can get. And the one rule that I made, and I'm not a huge rule guy, Nina, but the rule that I made with my team was, I'm making every decision going forward. I'm the signatory on everything. I told Alyssa that, and she said, be careful, because there's a lot. And all of a sudden she made me the signatory, and all day, every day, I'm signing things in my email for contracts, which is good. I want that responsibility. I want to be accountable. I don't want someone here thinking that they're making a decision that runs afoul of what the federal government is saying and not being comfortable. I don't want someone feeling that they can't do their job. And on the senior team level, they will advise me the best way that they can, and I'm going to make a decision and own it myself. And that's just how it has to be.
That's great. And I appreciate that leadership so that you can stay close to it. And, Matt, I'm just going to advocate for all of us that are on this call, right? We don't have the resources, the capacity, the in-house counsel. And if and when there's ever an opportunity for you to share how DLT is handling it, so that it makes it easier for us to follow suit, because we can kind of ride on your coattails, your proverbial coattails, right? It's difficult for us to individually fight these in a court of law. And so nonprofits are really looking for guidance. And so as you're navigating this, if there's ever a time where you can share how you're retaining practice, but maybe changing wording or whatever that looks like from you, just so that we can stay on top of it. And I know the Alliance and our agency are committed for as long as we can be, right? Because we're all, I want to be clear, like, we've been impacted by these cuts as well, right? We've been impacted by real jobs and federal dollars, et cetera. But as much as we can, try to all be, and Andrew, thank you for putting this in the chat, lockstep, like as long as we can all kind of move in that same direction, without losing the intent of our practice, I think will be really critical. So thank you for that. I do want to move over to the state side, and you kind of queued up a little bit of Road to Prosperity, the work that you're doing with the governor. I'd love for you to talk about the fiscal year 26 budget. You know, we all heard the address, the governor's address last month. There were some key buzzwords that were, of course, getting me excited. More around experiential work-based learning. We heard more investments in real jobs. We heard upskilling, reskilling, all of those words that we think get us excited, right? Small business development. Can you talk about those priorities? And I'd love for you to share more about Road to Prosperity and how it all interlinks.
Sure. So for the last year, I've been going around with the governor and with Commissioner Gilkey and some others talking about how we can make some policy changes and budget recommendations that will help Rhode Islanders grow their income. You know, and not just can they make a little bit more money, but can we get them into career paths that will be better off for them and their families in the future? Raising incomes is good for them, good for their family, it's good for our economy, and it's good for our state budget. And so even though it was a time when many agencies took cuts, DLT's budget grew. And that's a tough place to be in the cabinet, but a good place because we know that we're investing where we need to. So the governor's budget has about $14 million in state resources for real jobs. You know, that's good. That's the most it's been, I think, ever. And if not right at the top, a couple of times we did a couple of things with the Job Development Fund. But this is stateside resources dedicated to this program. That doesn't even include the $2 million that he's putting in to increase the number of youth work-based learning experiences and opportunities. You know, we anticipate doing that through Real Skills for Youth programming that we have. And then, Nina, don't tell yourself, but probably trying to expand the number of Prepare Our Summer High School interns. You know, we see the value in these programs. We know that getting people connected to the labor force when they're young will lead to better connection when they're a little bit older and entering into prime working years. We know that it can help people make decisions on their future, and we've seen it firsthand. So the governor, you know, put some money into it. You're going to put a couple million more dollars. We think at least 1,000, but probably 1,300 more youth will get experiences through that investment. 2.3 million for real jobs, and that money would come from nonprofits that have 500 or more employees contributing to the Job Development Fund. You know, a lot of those nonprofits utilize these programs and services, and yet they don't contribute. It's 500 or more employees. We expect about 25 large nonprofits to be impacted. Our first discussion about that publicly will be at our hearing in the Senate on Thursday next week. You know, we'll see where that goes, but the thinking is we need our healthcare systems. We need higher ed. We need everyone to be involved to grow Rhode Island's economy. And so 2.3 million more in this year is a good move for the program. In addition to that, going back on the youth side, 2.9 million for dual enrollment and CTE programming. You know, that'll help make sure that we're getting people college credit when they're still in high school and able to advance themselves in our economy. 800,000 to build out what we're calling Ready to Build with CCRI, which will be a bridge from high school and you know, young adult job seekers to the building trades, whether it be union or non-union through Rhode Island Builders Association, to get people that are younger connected to that industry. You know, our data tells us we'll have 9.3% growth by 2032 in that industry. We know 27.5% of the workers are 55 or older. These are good middle-class jobs. It pays higher than the average statewide job. We know that we need to get people connected, but oftentimes people aren't starting those jobs until they're 25, 26 years old. What about people that maybe aren't going to go to college right away or aren't going to go? Why can't we get them connected at 19, 18, 20 years old? And advancing that timeline has to help them grow their wealth. You know, putting them into meaningful middle-class employment in their early 20s will definitely be good for them and their families. So that's another investment we made. The budget's strong for workforce and needs to be, because we're at a time in our economy when that's super important. The governor's standing tall with it. I'll be at the governor with the governor. We're at the Board of Ed this week. Next week will be the Providence Chamber of Commerce. And then after that, we'll be on the road talking about these investments. And, you know, I think we have a lot of support in the State House, so that's good.
So Matt, there's a lot there to unpack. I'm gonna ask a couple of follow-up questions,
Sure
right?
thing.
The additional money that's going into real jobs, you mentioned nonprofits with 500 and above trying to figure out how to contribute. So kudos to you. One of the things I know that you and I've talked about is also employers contributing. Is there an appetite for DLT and the governor's office to also kind of launch this campaign where there's employer buy-in, employer contribution, figuring out how their dollars can go further, right? And it may not be a dollar for dollar match, but 25% or 25 cents on the dollar contribution. Have any of those conversations started? Is that something that we should be thinking about as we're trying to understand new approaches to funding in this very tight economy?
So we've definitely had those conversations, and we will be exploring all possible opportunities to keep the program going and to, keep it viable. I think it's definitely likely that we see a reset of real jobs in 2025. That would mean a new solicitation. Through that solicitation, we're going to have to pare it down a bit. We have like 60 partners, too many. And we're going to have to talk about, how we can best invest to help people. We want all of the partners that are involved to stay involved, but that may mean that some partnerships that combine or emerge to do similar work together and to utilize their strengths. As far as employers contributing, I think based on who's involved in the program, based on the size of the entity, we could probably come up with some model. Everything's going to have to be on the table, and we'll workshop this going forward. What I don't want to do is, in a vacuum, make a lot of decisions and then say, here's how we're going to run things from now on. I'd rather pull together focus groups of people that have been involved, ask them what they think about possible changes. Ultimately, we'll make a decision from the administration's perspective, but with an informed decision. And,
course.
how can we best continue to serve folks? So it's definitely on the table. At a time in history that was something that happened years ago. We walked away from that, and we were in a position financially to walk away from it. But now we're going to have to revisit a little bit that and other options too.
Okay. And how about private philanthropic dollars, right? So we saw, and obviously this is a much larger scale example, but when President Trump pulled out of the Paris Accord, you saw philanthropic leadership step in, and Bloomberg said, we'll pay our share, or whatever that is. Have you seen private philanthropic dollars coming together? Even here, whether it's within the state of Rhode Island or, the United Way, Rhode Island Foundation, the different charitable trusts that are out there, or even national foundations. Rhode Island's been pretty lucky with some of the national stuff, right? Have you been having those conversations? Have you been seeing any buzz around that, where this model, this ecosystem that you and others have been creating are attractive to some private philanthropic sponsors, if you will, to make up some of the difference?
Sure. And, on two tracks. One, I've had direct discussions with some of Rhode Island's larger philanthropic organizations. One thing I'm not doing is telling everybody, don't ask me, go ask them. Because I don't think it's not possible. The funding levels are not sustainable. And so I don't think creating all that chaos is necessary. What I think is good is if it's aligned with their mission and they have the opportunity to surgically invest in different areas, that's great. What we've also done is, with Shannon Gilkey, I've had the opportunity to meet with some national foundations, some that have a local foothold, to talk about keyed investments and how they could really help different either geographical locations in Rhode Island or different populations. And we're having those discussions now. And we do have a good track record with that. And everything that we can do through any of those relationships will free up opportunity through the if I'll call it the general fund for real jobs. So anytime we can, in ones and twos, pick up new sponsors, then we're going to have more opportunities through the state side.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. I do want to remind folks who were here with us today, we are asking you to put your questions in the chat. I do have one more question for Matt before we'll start taking some questions. And that is advice on advocacy. And we started with collaboration, right? You mentioned you're working with Commissioner Gilkey and others at the state level to collaborate. But what could we as nonprofits do to effectively engage with you and others at the state to advocate? You mentioned, You're going to be doing now your rounds that the governor's budget has come out. Where can we contribute? Where do we add value to the conversation? And I'm also going to say this, and then where are we a distraction, right? I've been up at the State House with these massive like blitz days, not sure if they're effective. So what advice can you give us, or where can we be helpful to you?
So the good thing is, I'm not an appropriator really. The legislature does that job, and in fact, the governor's not either. The governor has a budget recommendation, and it's solid for workforce. The governor knows the value of the program and wants to do all he can and keep growing this going forward. So you have some, the system has friends. The Speaker and the Senate President are also big supporters of this work. So what I won't be doing this year is trying to create some kind of a massive push. I was responsible for one that we ran, I don't know, many years ago when I brought a lot of you up to the State House. We had tables set up around the second floor. We signed 60 people up to testify at a hearing. Here's a little inside baseball. They don't like that very much. They don't mind the tables. That's helpful. But the message was clear, it was sound, and that was a previous administration decision. We're going to take a little bit of a different approach. I believe we have a lot of support already. What I think works really well is retail politics. So talk to your legislator. Talk to people that that are on the staff in the legislature, right? If you happen to go to an event and you see someone, talk to them for a minute and tell them the impact that workforce development can have on our community. It doesn't even have to be real jobs. Any programs that you're running, whether they're funded through real jobs or not. Talk about the value in that on the state side because of the dwindling federal resources. And I think together we should work, and advocate as a team. Because I appreciate that you're all, calling me and talking to me and asking me not to make these decisions, but there's not a decision to be made. The decision is I want to support you. And if I have the resources to do it, I'm absolutely going to do it. And the governor feels the same way. Now, he was in a different position because he's responsible to submit a balanced budget. And when I went in and I pushed hard for some things, his staff very rightfully pointed to the budget and said, where do you want us to cut so you can have money? Now, I did suggest that they would just give me every other agency's budget. I'll make the cuts myself. But they didn't take me up on that. So instead, they put in millions of dollars for workforce, which is great. But I think together we have strength. So if you want to meet with me and talk to me about how we can advocate together in a respectful and organized way, I'm here for you.
I do have a question on that. In terms of like when people advocate and go to their local elected officials, do they like to hear from us, or do they like to hear from the people we're impacting directly, or is it both?
I think it's both. I think they generally like to hear from the people that are impacted, but they're going to hear from all of us anyway, one way or another, because we're going to run into them. It's so small that they would expect you. Because here's how I would play it. If I were a legislator and somebody, even if I knew that you were interested in something, if you didn't ask me for it or didn't mention to me that it was important to you, when I'm making my decisions, even if I'm going to do something for you, I may not, open every coffer because you didn't ask. At some point you have to, don't be afraid to use your voice, ask and tell them this is our priority here. Now we have a lot of priorities, right? So my priority is workforce. My priority is to make sure that we can keep doing our work. You all may have competing priorities, but where this is high on your list, make it high on your list and be very direct with your legislator and tell them this is impactful for people in your community. But Nina, they want to hear from you too.
They run away from me, Matt, usually.
Yeah,
and you usually are sitting there laughing, watching as they run. So I'll just send the kids. They can't run away from the kids,
That's
right?
right.
That's what, and I've actually had that a few times. In fact, I think Nora was texting me one day. She goes, did you send Prepare Our Kids up to the State House? And I said, no, I swear I didn't. But when they're passionate about the work, it comes across, right? And I think all of us are passionate about what we do. Which is why we can come off in a way that sounds very overwhelming sometimes. But I know everybody on this call, and I see a lot of names that I know, people that I've worked with over the years, are passionate, right? And I think we're all very scared and worried because the needs of the people that we work with are not changing. And in fact, we say this at our team here at Skills, the needs are growing. The skills gaps are growing. Artificial intelligence, automation, the pace of change is still outpacing what folks are coming out of school with, what adults are learning in their current workplace. So I will say collectively, I think we're all worried, and it extends far beyond just the dollars and cents. It actually comes from a position of caring about those that we serve. I do want to just let the leaders that are on this call with us to know, in addition to the advice that Matt has provided in terms of advocacy and how to get involved, the Alliance for Nonprofit Impact, which has been incubated out of the United Way, has been working on advocacy and opportunities for that collaboration. And Nancy Walensky, I don't know if Nancy has rejoined, but who heads up the Alliance, has been working hard on crafting a letter. And I'm seeing some of the questions come to the chat, which is why I want to bring this up now, on a letter going to the governor on trying to figure out how to accelerate contracts and payments, because I know many of us are experiencing very low cash flows, and having to wait 20, 30 days on a contract can seem like years and can really put our operations in jeopardy. And so if you would like to learn more about a letter that has been drafted and will be going to the governor's office, and you want to get involved, I strongly encourage you to reach out for the Alliance for Nonprofit Impact at United Way and become part of that voice. And I think, Matt, you're right in that legislators want to hear from us, but they don't want to be bombarded up at the State House. I've learned that the hard way because I've played it both ways. And yes, well, I think I learned some of that from you, actually. So thank you for all of that. I would love to go, Matt, to some of the questions that have been put in the chat, and there's not a lot, but I will start with the one that's been posted by Evelise and Julio Sabatier. For the contracts that have already been signed with DLT, are they still valid and in effect, essentially? Are they still good to go?
Contract's been signed, then the contract's been signed. Go ahead and do the work. If anybody has a contract and they have questions about it, reach out through your grant advisor, or if it's a Real Skills program, one of the people that run Real Skills, whether that's Julissa, who's actually, I think, on this, or any of her colleagues. But yeah, I'm not clawing anything back. If we already signed it and we have an agreement, then let's go do the work.
Sure. And I think there's a similar question, and I apologize if I've mispronounced the name, but I see Sokio asking about Real Skills for Youth that has been awarded for contract year 25. Are there any anticipated financial cuts? What I heard you say is, in fact, there might be additional dollars if the governor's budget goes through for working with youth.
In FY26,
in fiscal year 26.
We anticipate growth for over FY25. That's right, because of the budget, but no cuts.
No cuts. So again, if your contracts have been signed and awarded, there are no cuts. And you will not be clawing back dollars, other than if they're not properly obligated, spent, or whatever that is, right? That's performance related. That's a separate issue. But if they've been
Real Skills for Youth is largely funded, if not entirely funded, by the state. So that's that's a bit different. And in this exact moment, it's more secure. So no problem.
Okay. Grizel, I see a comment in here from you. This grant can help all daycares fix playgrounds. Was there a resource that you were providing, or was there a question? If you could just clarify that for me, that would be wonderful. Again, we have some time for a couple of more questions. If there's anybody else, and I'm just scrolling through the chat right now to make sure that I didn't miss any as Matt and I were chatting away. And as I'm scrolling, Matt, I am going to ask, and this is something I saw a comment in here, and I'm trying to look for it now, about the impact to our agencies and layoffs and having to get rid of staff and downsizing, right? I'm trying to scroll to see if that comment is still here or has been. In terms of contingency plannings, right? Like, I can speak for my agency, but I'd love to first maybe hear from you at DLT. Do you have contingency plans in place for, maybe future federal freezes or significant reduction in staff, or are you just kind of taking this day by day, case by case?
Are you asking about for our staff?
I am. I'm saying for DLT, and then and I'm happy to share with those on the call that the way that we've handled it at Skills.
Right now, we're taking it day by day. I don't anticipate any major change right away that would leave us in a position where we couldn't afford to have staff. But if that were to happen, then we'll have to closely evaluate that. I've been at DLT when there was a major layoff. I've had to be one of the 3 people here that laid people off. It's a miserable experience, and we're the labor department, so it's not like real high on my list of things I want to do. I would love to prevent that, and to be able to fund you all to prevent it as much as possible too. It's really, really hard. Where DLT can also partner in the nonprofit world, if some of you have to reshift your workforce because of funds, we'd love to help people find next opportunities and help create environments where we can network, and maybe if people move over from one agency or organization to a different one, or maybe even get a job with the government, who knows. But we'd love to be a support network for people that could potentially be impacted, and not just here's how to apply for unemployment. We can do much more tailored services to help people.
Yeah. I'm going to come back to the unemployment in a moment, and I just want to share this with the other nonprofit leaders here that are on the call. Our agency had some significant growth through the pandemic with a lot of the ARPA dollars coming down. But as the leader of our organization, I knew and understood those were time limited, time restricted dollars. And we have been watching that timeline closely. And we started planning with our board of directors early 2024, saying that these ARPA dollars are sunsetting. Where are we going as an agency? We have about a year to figure it out. And we made some tough decisions in August where we issued voluntary layoffs. But we also wanted to be truthful and honest with our staff that we ramped up during the pandemic. We grew, we doubled in size in a very short amount of time. And we're strategic in all of our hiring letters, saying that it's contingent upon funding. And so when funding sunsets, we either pivot to a new position if it's available, try to get in new dollars, or we do have to go to layoffs. And that brings me to the next question. And Gilda wrote this in here too. When you're laying off, could we seek unemployment, and will it be approved? So can you talk a little bit about unemployment, and could you talk about how people can go about doing it? I'm assuming they would be approved if there's budget cuts related and there's layoffs. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, unemployment's available for people that lose their jobs, and mostly at no fault of their own. Occasionally, there can be a reason that somebody moves on from a job and we still approve it. But if somebody's laid off because of a budget cut, then absolutely they should be eligible. The best way to apply for unemployment is on our website at dlt.ri.gov. There's an unemployment tab under the For Individuals tab or something. It shouldn't be very hard to find, or if you just Google DLT unemployment application. And it can be a little bit complicated because of the changes after the pandemic. So you have to prove your identity, for instance. And obviously we did that because of all the changes, and we're very careful about how we do it. But for some people, that means that they get jammed up and they're supposed to call. And imagine thousands of people trying to call a call center that has 20 people working in it. That's difficult. So on our website, we have a help form for unemployment. And I put that up a few years ago, and it's been a lifesaver. You put your name, your contact information, and the only thing we ask of you is to answer the phone when we call. And we will call. And during our busiest times of the year, it might take a couple of days to do that. But in normal times, it's like same day or the very next day, you get a phone call, and we can process your claim and answer all your questions. But certainly it should be available for everybody.
And Matt, the last agency that I ran when I was at Federal Hill House, and we, you mentioned you've been through these economic downturns and have had to go through layoffs. Same with me. The last agency, we had to do layoffs, but we also took advantage of something called WorkShare. Is WorkShare still available? Is that still a valid DLT program? And do you want to talk a little bit about that, if that's an option for anybody on the call?
So it should be available. Here's what I don't want to promise right now. And what I can do is get you information that you can push out. But
Perfect.
I don't know how WorkShare intersects with reimbursable employers, meaning employers that don't pay payroll taxes. I think it would still be available and
Okay.
it would be treated the same way. And Workshare is basically a program that says, you don't have to lay your people off. What you can do is reduce their hours, and they can file a partial unemployment claim. So they get paid partially from the unemployment system, and they work reduced hours for you, and it's for a period of time. You have a plan, and you say it's going to be for this many weeks or months, and then you would come out of it and they would return to full employment is the goal, or not if it's not sustainable and you can't do that. And for those of you that pay dollar for dollar on unemployment, you would be billed the way you would be billed for any unemployment claim. It would just be reduced because they're not getting a full claim. So I think it should work normally, but we'll follow up with make sure you have information about that.
Okay, great. There was a question here in the chat about funding for playgrounds, and Sina Franklin, thank you for answering that. That's really I don't believe, Matt, DLT offers grants or funding for equipment or anything like that, but I do know you've been doing quite a bit on the childcare front in terms of talent pipeline building. Am I correct? I just want to double check with you that hasn't
That doesn't
changed.
seem like a grant that we would be involved in, but I appreciate and thank whoever helped out answer that question.
Yeah, and Sina, thank you for putting in the resource of LISC. They definitely have some dollars and resources, or at least have had in the past. And so I think, like all of us, all the funding for all of the different departments, whether federally funded, state funded, or privately funded, you want to double check to make sure that they're there. The next question here is from Howie. Have you been in touch with RIMA or other trade advocates? What are they saying? Are they preparing to support any funding trades with their private dollars?
With RIMA manufacturers?
Yes.
Yeah, I've been in touch with them and probably just about every trade association or industry association in Rhode Island, and they want to be part of the solution too. I mean, obviously, there are other programs besides Real Jobs that can also help with job training. Some of them are not available to some of the members or many of the members here because they don't contribute to the Job Development Fund, and some of them are restricted to that. Real Jobs is not restricted, so there is a difference there. But we'll be using every program that we have and weaving them together to help people as much as we can. I know that they're very willing to step in and be part of the solution as well.
Great. I have two more questions, Matt, and hopefully we can finish right on time. The next comes from Brian at RIMTA. Is there a way to begin a better statewide coordination of all workforce development initiatives among the many groups represented here? Youth training, CTE programs, underemployed adults, state post-secondary institutions, and the various groups and geographies and industries. So better way to coordinate. And I think that kind of goes hand in hand. Like, we want to learn how to advocate and collaborate better. What advice can you give to us, or is DLT leading any of that?
So I don't know that we should lead it, but I would tell you that coordination to me makes a lot of sense for many different reasons, even when you're coordinating with people that you may be competing against, because in this world you're all, and if we have to unfortunately downsize Real Jobs a little bit, we're going to be talking about new relationships with some of you if you'd like to both continue to do the work. And so I think getting together now and trying to sort through some of that and talk as a group makes a lot of sense. I'm very happy to join those discussions whenever you would like me to. And my team, who is much more skilled than I am at this work, will be happy to participate as well. I don't know that the government should drive that. I think it's stronger when you all come together and figure out how to use your voices as one, and then bring us in as you'd like to. And that means if you invite me every time, I'll show up, and I'll give you honest feedback. That's all I know how to do. I'm very happy to do that. But I think that the strength really needs to come from the members themselves, from the people doing the work. You're all experts in this work. We're not.
Thank you for willing to show up too, because that's important, right? You whether you realize it or not, Matt, when your name is on invitation, people show up. And so it's important, even if it's from a representation perspective. So thank you. And that's something I think that the Alliance could also take on and see how all of us that are even on this call, is maybe there's a follow-up, and I'll talk with Nancy. And Nancy, I know you're back on the call as well. Matt, there are, again, I said there was one more question, but there's actually two, and one's really important, and it goes back to the unemployment. Are contract employees eligible to collect unemployment? And I know this is some of those rules that you're talking about changed. Has where does DLT or where does the federal government stand on contract employees collecting unemployment?
They would have to have eligible wages from other employment. So if you're paying them on a contract and they're not on payroll, then those wages wouldn't count towards their unemployment claim. But when we do unemployment, we're not looking at the most recent wages. We're looking back 18 months or so, and then going forward 12 months from that. So essentially discounting the last 3 to 6 months. There are ways that we can make people eligible based on different formulas, but they would have had to have had W-2, like payroll employment, during that period of time.
Okay, so really they need that W-2. And the last question that we have time for is around AI. And Matt, I know that you've been leading the AI task force with the governor's team. Do you see any funding coming down to help support the new upskilling or reskilling that's needed around artificial intelligence? And I'm going to add, and other emerging technologies, right? Because it's AI today. What could it be tomorrow? And I know that I've been in the room with you in some of those conversations.
Yeah, I think Nora actually just chuckled when you said I was leading in that discussion.
Nora, he is. He's
Yeah,
there.
No, I'm hopeful because, this is something that's very important for obviously the future of our economy. And also it's top of mind for the governor. The charge of that task force is to come out with a report and to talk about how we can, position Rhode Island to be successful. And I think that could come with resources. And I'm very hopeful that the May Revenue Estimating Conference has some good information for everybody. Because if it does, I'll be right at the State House asking the governor, the speaker, and the Senate president to invest even more in workforce. And that's an area where we should certainly look to invest.
Great. Matt, I can't thank you enough. And I always appreciate your honesty and candor. I know while we might not have all the answers that we need, knowing that you're a champion and a leader who's always available and accessible makes it easy for us to navigate. So just a huge thank you on behalf of everybody who's on the call. I would like to pull Nancy Walensky back in, Nancy, just because there are some questions in here that I think between the Alliance and our agency, we can certainly keep the ball moving forward. And as you probably saw, there's a lot of activity and interest in coordination, collaboration, advocacy. And then specifically, I see some HR related questions around terminations and unemployment where we can help. But Nancy, I would love for you to be able to kind of remind people what you formed the Alliance for and how people can get involved.
Great. Thank you. And thank you, Matt, again, for taking the time to be here. I apologize for having to step out to do a different presentation and come back. We are, what is most important to us is to knowing what your needs are as nonprofits, because we are happy to develop programming and supports to address those issues. So that's the first thing, is just the more we know, the more helpful we can be. We have already had a conversation with Matt's team at DLT that is working in the rapid response and the workshare space to do a presentation for nonprofits. So if you want to learn more about that, if you're having staffing issues there, we will be letting you know about a session on that. We also have pro bono office hours so that you can talk with a content expert in HR or legal or finance about specific questions that you have. We also have a partnership with the Rhode Island Small Business Hub at Skills RI, so that there are additional resources available, particularly on the legal side, but also in finance and HR and marketing and a whole bunch of different areas. And so we have that available for you as well. So if you let us know about the specific needs you have, we will try and hook you up either with an expert at the hub or one of our pro bono experts. We also are going to be starting, I think I might have mentioned this at the beginning, but we're going to be starting bi-weekly policy briefings on Wednesdays at noon. So that is also important to keep up with what is happening in Washington and what might be affecting you here in Rhode Island. Nina had mentioned that we have sent a letter to the governor requesting that he and Department of Administration figure out some ways to expedite contracting and reimbursement payments during this time of crisis, because obviously, if you have money that is due you, that is being held up at the state level, that is going to exacerbate any issues you may have just on the funding level. So we will be having the opportunity for others to sign on to a letter to that effect as well, if you're interested in that. But we are eager to partner with the state and to see how we can work together, recognizing that the state doesn't have unlimited financial resources either. So this is something that, how can we work to get existing funding out more quickly in a more streamlined way to nonprofits? So thank you all for taking the time to hear from Matt. Matt, thank you for taking the time to be with us. And again, the ask from us is let us know what you are experiencing. That helps both the Alliance and our partners at Skills to have a better sense of what type of programming is needed. So as much as that we can do that, we want to be helpful. And it also we will share the recording of this call with you as well.
Yeah, I just saw that. And before we all leave, just a huge, whether it's a in your emoji, huge round of applause to Matt Weldon and his leadership and the work that he does. Matt, thank you truly from the bottom of my heart for being here. I know my single greatest takeaway is we're all in this together, right? You don't have a crystal ball. We don't have a crystal ball. And I know I will feel less inclined to throw something at the TV the next time I hear some crazy order and take what would Matt Weldon do and just kind of breathe and see, because we're going to be on this roller coaster ride. And Matt, from everybody here who's on the call, you know, let us know how we can help support you. Let us know the best way that we can advocate, whether it's at the state level, the federal level, or with private philanthropic dollars. What you've built here is a coalition who wants to support you and believes in the work. So I want to thank you for your continued tireless advocacy. And I know Nora's on the call somewhere here. She's lost in my screen. Nora, a big hug over to you too for the days that you have to take Matt's mouth.
It goes the other way.
Okay. All right. Thank you all so much. And
Thank you,
hopefully
everybody.
we'll see
Appreciate you.
on some future calls. Thank you all. Have a good weekend. Take care.